I'll welcome our Chair and CEO, Stan Magidson, and his guest, Peter Tertzakian, for a fireside chat. Take it away, gentlemen.
Thanks, Samir, and we're delighted to be with you here today and see such a terrific room. I think I'm going to go off script here. I don't know if our handlers will like this, but whether you like him or not, Donald Trump has shown you can succeed when you go off script. So, we were told really not to do the bios as part of the introduction of our guests because it's all on the site. It was been part of the promotion of the program generally, but I don't think I would be doing this session justice without giving you a sense of Peter's background and why we've asked him to open up this conference. And maybe once you hear about his background, you'll understand why we thought it was such a terrific opening for today's session. So, Peter's been around for a long time, and he's an energy economist, he's an author, he's an entrepreneur, a podcaster with more than 35 years of experience in the business of energy, from oil and gas to renewables. He's known for delivering presentations that spark discussion on some of today's most important topics. He's frequently called on to share his knowledge of strategic issues with investors, corporate leaders, policymakers, and educators around the world. A respected industry leader, Peter's the founder of the ARC Energy Research Institute. In 2020, he launched Energy File, a research-based project exploring energy's past, present, and future. And in 2023, he founded Studio.Energy, which is an initiative dedicated to mentoring the next generation of leaders to address the world's complex energy challenges. He currently sits on the board of the National Gallery Foundation in Ottawa. Peter's also a storyteller at heart, using a creative approach to distill, clarify, and communicate complicated issues regarding energy, economics, and the environment. He's written 2 international bestsellers, 1,000 Barrels a Second and The End of Energy Obesity. His most recent book, The Investor Visit and Other Stories, is a collection of creative, nonfiction stories exploring how our energy past can help us navigate our energy future. Undergraduate degree in geophysics from the University of Alberta, graduate degree in econometrics from University of Southampton in the UK, and a Master of Science in Management of Technology from the Sloan School of Management at MIT. So it's my true pleasure to be sitting on the same stage as Peter today to open this conference up. And with that kind of introduction and a context for why he's here, let's get it going here, Peter. So I've certainly given a sense of your flavor of your background, but what are you currently focusing on in your new initiative at Studio.Energy or otherwise?
Yeah, thanks, Stan, and I'm delighted to be here, humbled with the introduction, and we've known each other a long time, so really appreciative to be back. Studio.Energy is a place where people come and think about the business of energy. So that's the short part of it. There's 2 phrases in that. One is the business of energy. Coming at it from the business of energy is coming at it from the intersection of corporate leadership, finance and investment, and policy, which has a huge impact now, as we're going to discuss, on the whole financial and corporate landscape. So those are the 3 areas we focus on in the business of energy. The other word is think. This is a place where people come to think. So you say, oh, you're a think tank. You say, well, actually, sort of. It's not a traditional think tank where we publish reports and effectively tell you what to think. This is a think tank where people come to learn how to think. When I was thinking about putting the studio together, one of the things I found, especially post-pandemic, as I interviewed corporate leaders and policymakers, financiers, and so on, about what was really, lacking What was the problem in their organizations? And repeatedly and independently, people said, you know, Peter, we've really lost the ability to think about complicated problems. We're inundated left, right, center with all sorts of information. It's creating a sense of paralysis. And not only is information coming at us left, right, and center, we don't even know what to believe anymore. And so the ability to critically and creatively think and cut through all the noise has taken an elevated position in our studio, because that's what we feel is really needed now. And so we bring in what we call apprentices from the next generation of leaders from the three areas that we target.
Sounds like a major brainstorming kind of shop and exercise, and trying to get away a little bit from just reacting, but ideally ideation and creativity formation.
Yeah, ideation, creative thinking, problem solving. Again, it's up to me as the mentor in the studio to guide the thinking. Everybody's biased, right? Everybody's biased, but I try and encourage people to think for themselves. And that is the product. That's the product of the studio. The product is then sending the person back into their organizations, and they now have a different way of thinking. And in the process, we also create what I call knowledge products, products that help with energy literacy with both the business of energy, which is also critically lacking, and we'll talk about.
Well, sets the stage maybe for my next question, problem solving. So, you know, as the saying goes, Peter, we live in interesting times. We now have the results of the US election. We have a Canadian economy that one could say is challenged. We have an Alberta-Ottawa political relationship that at best is fractious. And, you know, we have two hot wars that are active as we speak. So what's your take on all of that that's happening presently? And ultimately, we're going to distill this more into what do we do about all of this, or how do we factor it in? But this is a pretty volatile time and a challenging time for us, both in Alberta and Canada, I would say.
Yes, it's a volatile, challenging time, but it's not a movie we haven't seen before. We have, I think, stand of the same generation. I mean, I'm a child of the Cold War and the tumultuous times in the 60s and 70s. I'm also a student of history, looking back at what's happened. I mean, I think what's unusual, as I reflect, is the prior, say, 20 years, which were particularly the prior 10, like the period between 2010 and 2011, yes, sort of coming out of the financial crisis, but there was this eerily calm period where geopolitics was really not that volatile. The cost of capital was incredibly low. The economies were growing, and that was the unusual thing. Because if you look back at history, I mean, it's constantly tumultuous and fraught with geopolitical problems and hot wars popping up left, right, and center and having to deal with it. So we're back in many ways, unfortunately, and I don't say this with any sense of satisfaction, but we're sort of back to times that we've had to deal with before. And so we have to think of the present and the future in terms of what are the formulas of success, number one, for countries like ours as we go forward, and we'll talk about that, not that I have all the answers. I can tell you that what the future strategy should be is more defined by what not to do than what to do, because the set of what to do has many options. I would argue none of which are necessarily wrong, they just take us. But there is a set of things in my mind of what not to do, and we can talk about that.
Okay. Well, that's another reason we invited you, Peter. I don't know if you've heard Peter speak before, but a lot of what he brings to the conversation is a sense of history. And I think, if I'm right, I think you're a big believer that there is a lot to learn from our past in terms of how to then consider the present and the future. And maybe you could just elaborate a little bit more on that. I recall the book, 1,000 barrels a second, and you talked all about whaling in New England was all the rage, and then suddenly that shut down and we had to find other forms of energy. But
Yeah.
is that a correct proposition that there is a lot to learn in our past as we think about the future? I don't know about you, Peter, maybe I'm just getting old, but there's a sense I have that there has been a time or a period recently where having experience has been discounted as irrelevant. It's being viewed as, oh, you're biased or you have legacy baggage or whatever that you're bringing to the issue, and we need new creative thinkers, out of the box thinking. And I think personally, like, innovation is a great thing, but I personally take a lot of value in experience and judgment and people who've been through the wars to understand how things may evolve in the future. Do you have a general view on that, this innovation versus historical context?
Yes, I do. Again, so past is not perfect prologue, okay? Like, it's not a perfect predictor of the future by any stretch, but again, we can look at the past and get guidance. And as I said, I also think very much in terms of, instead of seeking what to do based on the past, and the answer is more aligned what not to do. And that sometimes gets you to a better place of thinking. But I think what you're also highlighting in terms of experience is something that I focus on a lot and in part on the people I work with in the studio, and that is thinking holistically, thinking contextually. And the temporal dimension, time dimension, is contextual. Right? So, one of the things I've thought about over the course of the last 20 to 30 years, so I'm going back to the 1990s, where I used to stay up nights and weekends typing numbers into spreadsheets and reconstructing charts and graphs that had a 30, 40-year time span. Sometimes the time series, say oil prices or inflation or whatever, went back decades. And I look at that, and that's contextual. And then I overlay on top of that sort of the historical moments and stuff. As we got into the 2000s and certainly the 2010s and now, it seems like the charts and graphs only go back 18 months. I mean, check it out. When you go to the various news agencies and look at the charts and graphs they produce. I mean, you'd be lucky to get something over 2 years, right? And so I'm thinking, like, where's the context here? And you look at those charts, and they go up like this, and they're kind of jagged, and then somebody's drawing inferences from these things, and I'm going, this is ridiculous. Like, it's such short-termism. And so the context as a broad thing, not only context in other dimensions, is so important, but the temporal context is also important, because we can learn, oh yeah, when the price of oil fell to $40, this is how the world behaves. When there's, for example, the 73 and 79 oil price shocks, this is how the world behaved, and this is how the transition to different energy sources, nuclear power as an example, occurred then. And what we'll layer on top of that, the policies that were introduced as a consequence of the 73 and 79 oil price shocks, and you start to get the bigger picture, right, of how that movie unfolded. And I'll say it again, as sort of the child of the Cold War. I mean, as events in Ukraine played out, as events in the Middle East played out, and there's a scramble, I'm thinking, okay, this movie has been seen at least 2 to 3 times before in the last 100 years. Like, it's not, this is nothing new. So we can learn from that.
Terrific, just to say it, when people talk about interest rates at 4 or 5% being shockingly high, for those of us who had to carry 18% mortgages,
sure,
we're kind of saying, what's the big deal here? But look, and I don't say that in a trivial sense, because clearly there will be dislocations with higher interest rates and then people having to renew mortgages. I don't for a moment discount that reality, but just in terms of context, a 4% kind of mortgage or 5% mortgage is, in historical terms, probably quite reasonable. But
in historical terms, I think it was 1983-ish there was mortgage rates at 19%, at its peak, and it was just like, okay. And people were taking out those mortgages.
Right. So we don't want to go there, but
we don't want to go there.
let's now talk about more concretely. We've been up in the cloud here a bit, but now let's talk a bit more concretely, Peter. So I think where we're going is there are a lot of challenges out there. And this is a very broad question. You take it however you want, but how should we address these challenges we're currently facing here in Alberta and Canada?
Well, I mean, the past lessons are clearly when you're in times of uncertainty and there are a lot of strong characters, I'll call them, in the world, what not to do is to be weak and disorganized. And I feel our country is somewhat in that state right now, which is unfortunate because our country has so many advantages, particularly in our natural resources. And I'm not just talking about oil and gas. I mean, if you think about what this country has from a natural resource perspective, we have agriculture, forestry, wind, sun, fisheries, oil, gas, coal, uranium, like you name it. We're leaders in almost every single one of these things. And we don't play to that strength. The strength is amplified by a century of investment in infrastructure around those resources, most of which has been paid for by foreign investment. I'll digress for a moment and say, when I led the royalty review in 2016, we did a look back of investment because investment was a key theme as it related to whether royalties should go up, down, or sideways, right? So we looked back at historical investment and noted that in real dollar terms, there was that time, I think $1.5 trillion of invested infrastructure just in our oil and gas over the course of the last 100 years, most of which was in the last 30. But the striking thing was that 75% of it came from abroad, and most of it from the United States. In other words, we had other people pay to lay out the infrastructure for our prosperity. Now you fast forward today and you say, well, who's investing in our country's infrastructure from outside? And the answer is not a lot of people. And we do not have the capital pools in our country of whatever the population is now, I don't know, 40 million, I've lost track. Whatever it is, it's not very much. Certainly, if you think about it in the context of our land mass and the size of our country, like we don't have the capital pools to do all the things that we need to do ourselves. Yet, I come back to that point about the 100 years of investment paid for by other people. That's part of a huge comparative advantage that we talk about. We talk about being competitive, but actually there's the other economic comparative advantage, which we should play to our strengths. I mean, we have some of the best practices and the lowest costs, and some of the things we do are most efficient. Like, we don't play to those strengths anymore. And we need to, because if you can get the magic combination of comparative and competitive advantage, then you're really rocking and rolling. And there's nothing saying we can't do that if we start thinking from a position of strength. And so I come back to what not to do, being weak, uncertain about what our strengths are, and in disarray is what not to do. So the converse is come to the table strong, know your strengths, and bargain therefore. And so obviously we're talking about, say, US and Canada, but it's not just US and Canada. It goes way beyond that in a geopolitical sense. We are part of a Western alliance, not just with NATO, but also if you think about the Western democratic world, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Japan, etc. Those are our historic democratic allies, and we have an obligation, I believe, to be strong within and position ourselves with confidence and strength in that context as well, because history would tell us that you need strong alliances to deal with issues like we are dealing with today.
So Peter, that takes me in a couple of directions. This point about our reliance on foreign investment to develop our resources and infrastructure, in your view, will that continue to be critical, and or do you think we need to perhaps get Canadian investment, maybe our pension funds, more focused on investing in Canada as opposed to globally, or both? Maybe you'll say we need capital from wherever it will come, but over to you. Where do you think the focus needs to be?
There's no singular answer
Right.
in this regard. Well, let's work backwards from what you said. Like, should we get Canadian pension plans to invest more in Canada? I don't know what their portfolio allocations are, to be honest with you. But, this is dominantly a capital markets crowd. So, the term OPM, right? Other people's money. I think
People can relate to that.
I think, it's, we have in this country benefited greatly from other people's money, investing in our country and laying out the infrastructure. We then operate that infrastructure and receive tremendous benefit and prosperity.
But then, to state the obvious, right, capital is very fluid, volatile.
Capital is fluid.
And we'll go to countries in which the perception is the return on investment is a worthwhile one, which gets back to having policies, et cetera, that are attractive to investors.
Yeah, well, I point to, in some of my presentations, I put up this slide. I haven't done it for a while, but I have an eclectic collection of energy memorabilia in my personal museum. One of them is this magazine from the 1950s. So, imagine you're 10 years from World War II, and it's the rebuilding, and the certainly in North America and the United States and Canada is a boom time. And so the article reads, and this is an American magazine, there's a fortune to be made in Canada. And it has a map of all of our natural resources. And you read the article and it says, this is the land of milk and honey. This is a place where you should put your money. And that theme has been prevalent, throughout the 20th century. And so now we come to the 21st, and gradually the theme is dying out for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is just competition for capital. And capital, the ability also, it's not only competition for capital, but of course the information systems, the globalization that allow capital to move instantly from one locale to another. It's not clear in the minds of people either south of the border or anywhere else in the world that there's a fortune to be made in Canada. That is not loud and clear anymore. Even though, actually, I personally believe there is, if we can actually come at it, as I said, from a position of confidence and strength. And it's not just natural resources. It's the thinking about the infrastructure on the natural resources and the information systems and the talent pools that we've created, the labor pools. Like, we've got it all, if you really think about it. It's just that, there's just not a lot of harmony right now across the country, and I don't hear, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, somebody for the question, or Slido or whatever, that we have a concrete industrial economic strategy that everybody buys into in this country. Well, actually, everybody doesn't need to buy into it, but that's sort of a dominant theme, right? This is what Canada's about. This is why you should invest here. This is what we do well. This is where our advantages are. We're open for business. Come here.
So the challenges then, Peter, they seem to be national, like getting our act together as a country. Secondly, clearly, with the new regime in the US, you can see how that's playing out in terms of crystallizing the reality of a challenge there cross-border in terms of what Trump is seeking and how we're reacting. That's a huge challenge. And then to your point, it's also a global one. Mm-hmm. So would that be a fair statement? It's all three of these dimensions.
Yeah, I think it's worth exploring that. I mean, if you look at American culture in general, and even I sort of observe it as it's evolved over the last 20, 30 years, it's become ever more, I think we can agree, It's a culture of confidence. It's a culture of strength. I went to school down there, and they beat into your head, you're the best. Go out and conquer. Right? That's what you learn in those schools down there. And so the election of Donald Trump, again, whatever you may think of him and his appointees, is just that level of confidence on steroids. And so they prey on the weak. And there's other regimes in this world that prey on the weak now, I think we can agree. So for us not to exude some sense of confidence and strength, which we can do with credibility, because we do have reasons to be strong, we just need to do it. So now get to part B of your question, which is, okay, like, why is that? Is it the federal, provincial? I think so. I mean, I think we need a much stronger federal government that herds the cats, frankly, because otherwise we drift apart. I mean, if you believe in Canada at large as a strong and advantaged country worth preserving, then we need to think of ourselves as Canadian first. But as I reflect, we've drifted apart. We think of ourselves in our provincial jurisdictions first, right? Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, BC, whatever, right? And so how did that drift occur? Because I don't recall that sense. I mean, yes, Quebec wanted to separate and so on, but generally speaking, like, we were Canadian first, and I don't get that sense much anymore. So it is up to the federal government to try and reinstate that sense of Canadianism, patriotism and stuff that is now prevalent in many other parts of the world, right?
Okay, well, maybe we could then take the next part of this, Peter, having kind of talked about all of these challenges in our predicament, if you want to call it that. What's the opportunity? Like, if you were being asked by people with power, politicians, whatever, what do we need to do in this country to take advantage of our natural strengths and all that we have in this country that's terrific?
Yeah.
What would be your recommendations on how we should move forward at this time?
Well, again, not to be repetitive, but play to our strengths, play to our comparative advantages, do a scan of what we're good at, what we're not, where we have the advantages. And there's a tendency, as further to the previous question, to point to the government and say, you go do it. Right? And actually, the government's getting, I think, legitimately tired of saying, well, why are you pointing your finger at me to do all this stuff? Right? And say, well, then it's now up to us, as corporate leaders, financial leaders, other leaders, community leaders, to stand up and be more vocal. Because I also sense that there's our culture and our society has become one of almost like a reality TV show. We just sort of stand back and watch everything unfold and expect it to get better, or expect somebody else to do it for us. Like, Stan, you and I grew up, so had formative years in our careers in the 80s and 90s, right? And I mean, I remember corporate leaders, certainly in the oil and gas business, standing up in front of a microphone in the media, not afraid to talk about the issues. When was the last time you saw a CEO in any industry get up in front of a TV camera? I don't know. I guess maybe I don't watch that much TV, but my sense is I don't really see them. And I think there is a responsibility for now everybody to stand up and be more vocal and not be afraid of the consequences, have a thicker skin, and get out and say, okay, these are our strengths, and let's play off them and have conviction. Right? And you may not agree with the person standing up in front of the media. I mean, even saying TV is a bit old school now, isn't it? Right? Like, standing up in front of whatever media channel, or even a politician such as our own here in Alberta standing up with, I mean, she's got conviction, and you may not agree with it. It doesn't actually matter in my mind. The point is that there's conviction and some passion that we are great here and we need to get stuff done.
Peter, just to close this out then, if you could leave the audience with one message about what could the people in this room do individually or collectively to try and make a difference, to kind of course correct, to actually expose and take advantage of all the opportunities this country has. I must say personally, when I travel the world, look around the world, there are countries that have way greater challenges than we do, and I find that they actually, some of them are advancing quite nicely. We just seem to be kind of stuck or reactive, but is there some call to action you want to leave with the crowd here today?
I mean, it's difficult to answer that, Stan, because everybody in the crowd is different, but under the assumption that the audience, you are leaders in your organization at whatever level, that there is a sense of, okay, try and break out of the paradigm, I'll use that word, the paradigm that you're in, because the world has just actually, in a very short period of time, changed, and we need to think differently. We need to think much more differently, more creatively, and we need to act with more confidence in what we do. That's what we're trying to build in Studio.Energy. We're trying to build that kind of thinking going forward, but not in an obnoxious, aggressive manner. I'm just saying, like, I'll get back to what I said earlier, like, you can't just watch the world go by like a reality TV show and expect somebody else to fix your problems. Like, you need to take charge. We need to take charge, I guess maybe is a broad umbrella statement, and work with others to take charge, because what we have in this country is truly second to none. And it's just so worth preserving. I mean, I wake up every morning saying how privileged I am to be in this country, given all the terrible things going on in the rest of the world. It's just, I just, sort of conclude with one more thing. I said on a stage, I don't know, maybe it was 7 or 8 years ago, the poll came out, or the rankings came out, and whether it was the Economist magazine, something like that, and Canada ranked close in the top 3 or something like that. And I said, well, that's good news and bad news. I said, the good news is we ranked number 3 or number 1. The bad news is we've only got one way to go if we're not careful. And I feel that sense of entitlement, watching the world go by and assuming everything's going to be okay, is not. Like, we have to work hard to maintain that position now, because I would say really the turning point, the war in Ukraine, was one of the big turning points, even the pandemic, where we just have to start thinking differently. We can't think like we had the prior 20 years, which, bringing it full circle, in my mind, was an abnormal period.
Terrific. Well, look, I think the challenge has been issued. Game on, and maybe through the course of the day here, we'll hear more about how we could navigate into opportunities given the current context. Peter, thanks so much for being with us.
Pleasure.
I'm very curious to see what further evolves at Studio.Energy, and I suspect our audience will be as well.